You can see legislative, obviously a big part of it. We work with government, we work with our state, local, and federal governments, working on bills that affect agriculture, and how do we work through regulation in order to make agriculture more profitable for our growers, and then also how do we remove barriers for our growers to continue to have a business. Water, obviously, you'll see these are all very important to growing, right? Labor, we actually provide H2A services for our growers. If you're a grower that says, hey, I don't have a domestic workforce anymore, I need to start having H2A guest visa workers on my farm, we will bring that system to your farm. We'll help you set up for that. Trade and supply, again, obviously, it's kind of a big deal now with supply chain issues and trade negotiation, tariffs, and all that. So we are heavily involved in DC with those discussions. Science, food safety, packaging. We have a team of 4 PhDs that work exclusively on these issues. Then you have the innovation team, which is the team that I'm on. 3 key areas: automation, biologicals, next-gen ag worker. Next-gen ag worker is how do we teach the new generation of students to actually work on this equipment and work on the farm with new technology. I say this all the time, that traditionally agriculture has fixed equipment with a big hammer and a big wrench. Now we're fixing equipment with multimeters and iPads. So we work through a CDFA grant that Karen Ross has granted and extended to us. Carrie Peterson, who works with Western Growers as a consultant, helps community colleges build modules in agriculture and ag tech to help teach the next generation of these workers. So that's AgTech X. Biologicals is chemical replacement inputs using biological and natural inputs. Dennis Donahue leads that effort. We'll go into the team here in a minute. And my role is automation. I deal with all the automation for all the growers for labor challenges and labor offset. Everything that's outside, and again, everything for the crops that our growers grow. Everything from pistachios to onions to strawberries to melons, almonds, and everything in between. So all the automation is what I work in and work day to day, and I have a pretty extensive background in automation. This is the team. I'm the new guy. I've been at Western Growers for about 2 years now. January will be 2 years for me. Dennis Donahue, who has been biologicals and automation for the longest time, is now solely focusing on biologicals. He also doubles as the mayor of Salinas. Emily Lyons is our program manager. We actually all say we work for Emily because she actually pulled us all together, make sure we're doing all the right stuff. And then Walt Duflock is our senior vice president. He's leadership and running strategy over everything we do. So as I talked about the automation piece, and this crop robotics landscape was actually just released, I believe, yesterday here at FIRA from Rob Trice in partnership with the Mixing Bowl. This is a landscape of all the companies, startups, major OEMs that are trying to provide solutions into agriculture, right? And I kind of drew that little flow diagram there. They're all trying to get to the growers, and quite simply, I kind of stand in the middle of all that. I work with venture capital and other financial institutions. I work with all these startups, and I work with all the major OEMs. And then, quite frankly, obviously, I work with the growers, understand their biggest challenges. So this is the most updated one. This is actually, I think, seriously was released yesterday. Mixing Bowl and Rob Trice do a fantastic job of creating this landscape. And the strategy around commercialization of what the Western Growers Innovation Team does for ag tech and agriculture, bringing solutions into our growers' fields, is relatively simple from the top level. Obviously, we have to deeply understand the challenges of our growers from labor side, and not just a big wide swath of labor. It's specifically what is the labor. Some of the numbers surrounding labor are We spend over, in specialty crops, high value specialty crops, we spend over $10 billion a year annually in harvesting alone. Harvesting lettuce, harvesting broccoli, strawberries, table grapes, $10 billion plus every single year. Not only is labor becoming unaccessible, labor is also becoming incredibly expensive. The numbers surrounding H-2A guest visa worker program is right around $30 an hour. So for people to harvest that are on a guest visa work program is around $30 an hour, which includes their housing, food, and transportation. So not only is labor becoming more scarce, it's also becoming more expensive. So understanding exactly how labor fits into our growers' operations and how to try and supplant that with automation technology. Now, the key part of this discussion is ROI, right? But what does ROI mean, right? I work with our growers specifically to help them understand their numbers. You'd be very surprised how growers will have a thumbs up, thumbs down of, I think it cost me about this or that. I say a lot of the work that I do is actually just working with the growers for them to understand what their actual numbers are, how much they spend on harvest, how much they spend on weeding, how much they spend on crop inputs and applications. Some things fall through the cracks, like how much should we spend in diesel and all those things. So understanding, the base root of all this is getting the growers to understand their actual numbers. Then you can work with the technology companies, right? And then you can start to help them understand where the real pain points are. We do that with a few different tools that Western Growers has developed specifically to help these efforts and commercialization of ag technology. And then there are also some really great materials out there, like one of them put out by UC Davis, which is the cost benefit or cost analysis studies in agriculture. If you've not heard of those and you are an ag tech, you should look them up tonight. They are a very thorough, in-depth agriculture economic analysis study of almost every single crop in almost every single region of California, what the costs are step by step through every single operation on the farm. It's an incredible way to analyze a system. I also create ROI templates. We're going to see some of the results of those ROI templates here in a little bit, but quite frankly, it's a glorified spreadsheet. It's really not that complex. It is some big assumptions and running those through some very conservative analyses and some conservative, different ways of looking at things in order to come up with a relative number of what a payback period is in ROI. What a grower understands an ROI is and what an ag tech startup and a venture capital understands what ROI is can be completely different. So I'll tell you, a lot of work I do is just working with startup, and they will also create an ROI template. And I sit down with them and I say, okay, let's look through your ROI template. Why is the cost of your machine going down so fast? Oh, that's because labor is getting increasingly expensive, so we put a 20% increase on labor every single year. Okay, well, let's hold that flat. Let's see what that does, right? Oh, we put a 10% kicker on diesel. Okay, well, let's hold diesel fuel flat, right? So trying to get everybody on the same page for this stuff, because I think growers have been very fatigued and quite frankly burnt out on looking at some complex spreadsheets that companies have to provide and growers have to look at, and they start to go cross-eyed after a little bit, and they don't seem to be working correctly. So I step in and we start to analyze these together and just kind of make it a little bit more broad and general, and it seems to really work. Last part of this is the unbiased financial viability case studies. This is an effort that I started when I came on with Western Growers. This is using data that our growers allow me to publish. This is their own financial data where they say, this is what my weeding bills were, and this is what my weeding bills are after I implement this technology. And we'll go through that pretty in depth here in a few minutes. We'll go through the case by case basis for the 2 case studies I have that we have published. And then we will also be releasing a new one today as well. As a part of this presentation, our new case study on automated irrigation systems is on our website live today. You know, our case studies are on products that have been sold to a grower, and a grower has been using them for over a year, 1,000 acres, or an entire season. This is something that a grower is using that is hands-off from the startup. This is a commercially viable product that a grower is using. And we do the analysis using the grower's data. This is a big part here. The growers give us the ability to publish their data, and that is due through a lot of trust with me and with our growers and with our board members. You'll see the growers are actually submitting their data here are some of the most progressive growers in our entire industry, and then our board members, and for the most part also executive committee members within Western Growers. So they believe in this effort as well. And then the last piece of kind of this commercialization strategy is, after we do case studies, we like to try and somehow get our partners like Axis Ag and Jason Mello, and also through Reservoir, different programs to help startups commercialize their product further and get their stuff actually out in the dirt and get acres on it, beat stuff up, iterate it, fix it, and provide an actual commercial product for growers. So that's a little bit about the strategy we go through here on the team. So this was our first case study that we released, carbon robotics laser weeding. This is on our website. You can go to Western Growers Association, Innovation, and then Case Studies, and you'll see all of our case studies that have been released. This was the first one we did, analyzing Braga Fresh's data, and also JV Smith and Triangle Farms, their data. What you'll see here is that it's a very important point to analyze and look at, which is what I'm going to focus on as well later in this discussion, is you'll see that there's a $350 per acre savings with using carbon robotics and using laser weeding. But you'll see what they actually pay for the laser weeding is around $262, but then you'll also see that there is also continuous hand weeding as well. So this is not a solution that eliminates all of the labor, right? So when you think about an ROI, you have to think about a combined total operational system, right? This is an operational system. This is not a plug and play. You drop this thing in and you lose, and you have all that advantage of the costs that they pay for labor previously. You have to understand that there could be a combined cost of having to use hand labor as well. So that's a part of you have to think about. If you're creating a machine, you're creating a solution for growers, you have to think about, what operational system am I entering into, and how am I optimizing that, and how am I reducing the costs? And how does the totality of those costs still equal a net benefit for the grower, right? If it's not a net benefit, they are not going to use your technology or your machine, plain and simple. This was the case study that we did with Stout Industrial Technology. This was through JV Smith and Triangle. It's Chris and Aisha Smith. She is now a board member. Her dad was a longtime board member and I believe previous chair of Western Growers. They are one of the most progressive farms, and everyone in AGTECH is kind of an unknown joke in the veg sector that says, if you have a piece of technology, go sell it to Matt McGuire or JV Farms. They're the first one to buy it. They like to be incredibly progressive on trying tech. But again, this is a similar thought, right? This is a combined total operational savings. So when you look at ROI, you have to think about it from this perspective. What is the total cost? Traditional costs a growers spend, and how are you saving them money? And there are a few different ways to think about ROI, and there are also ways to help you get into adoption as well. We'll go into that here in a few minutes. But there's some key learnings I've learned over the years. Part of my history is I actually started out as a technical blue-collar person in the professional trades. When I was 19 years old, I was building agriculture equipment in Salinas. I was building harvesters, I was building tillage equipment. I was repairing this equipment at 2 in the morning when they had to harvest at 6 a.m. that same day. I got my engineering degree when I was 31 years old from California State University, Fresno. Go Dogs. And since being graduated in mechanical engineering, launched me into ag tech, and technology. And that background has really helped me understand farming and how we're going to help revolutionize farming and agriculture using technology. And there's been a lot of lessons and learning along the way. And through this 2 years, almost 2 years I've been with Western Growers, I've talked with so many different startups. I looked actually in my Google Drive folder last night, and I have over 71 different ROI calculators that I've accumulated from startups. And we're going to go through some of the learnings through those calculators, and then also the adoption method as well. What works, what trends have I seen, and what really works and helps out. We're going to start with some of the misconceptions and learnings, right, on the ROI side. Quantitative versus qualitative, right? This is something you learn kind of early on in science and engineering. What are the hard numbers? Some of the numbers we saw with stout and laser weeding. What are the hard numbers? This is a dollar saved that's very evident, that's very easy to prove. And then the qualitative data, which is, well, I think I'm getting a little bit improved stand. I think my stand is going to harvest earlier, or I think I'm getting, more yield at the end of the day because of using this. The qualitative side that's really hard to attach numbers to. And quite honestly, if people start to turn the qualitative into quantitative data, I'm the first one to really point my finger and say how and why, show me. And I'd say growers are really looking at that as well. This is another reason, or another thing to think about as we talk through again with stout and carbon, is when someone designs a machine, they say, okay, growers are paying $800 an acre for high density weeding, for weeding and high density hand labor. So I'm going to sell a machine and I'm going to charge them the equivalent of that. And I can capture all our revenue, which means I can build a machine for X amount and all those sort of things. Again, as we talked through earlier, it's very rarely seen that you are offsetting that cost 100% by technology. The other side of this is growers say that, some ag technologists say that, there are higher premiums. We can offer a higher premium because we can help you do some things that are a little bit more qualitative, right? Like you say, well, we can increase your yield, we can increase your stand, we can increase, the sugar content or something of the sort that's more qualitative, so quantitative, which they feel deserves a higher premium. I will tell you, to this day, I have never seen a grower buy something that says that it's going to increase their yield without actually seeing a peer-reviewed research paper, without seeing it on their farm, without having firsthand knowledge or experience that is actually the case. So there is part of what I wanted to say today is also to say that if you are claiming that your yield is going to be increased and that you can go to harvest faster because of the implement of this technology, you need to bring numbers and facts or you will be told to leave before you even step in the door. This is one I actually came to realize here about a few months ago or so, and I'll use an example of drone technology on both sides. The use of technology to achieve a reduction in labor does not always equal an offset or a reduction in headcount. So if your technology does not offer a reduction in headcount or an offset, somebody can go from pulling weeds to on a harvest crew. Again, that is a combination of costs that you have to account for in an operational system. And the example I'm going to use is drones. So for drone spraying, this is a very quantitative data set. You can say there is a boom tractor that costs $300,000 by the time it's got booms on it and all the fancy stuff. You have to have a semi-truck, you got to have a Class A license, you got to have diesel, you got to have all this stuff to do a spray rig tractor. Now I have 3 drones, 2 operators, a half-ton pickup, and a trailer. there is a lot of quantitative data. Sorry, dyslexia is kicking in. There's a lot of quantitative data there that suggests that there is a great ROI there, right? That you can cover the same amount of acreage with a boom tractor and one operator with 3 DJI spray drones and 2 operators. You're swapping out batteries, you're filling the chem in on a continual basis. We have a grower in the desert in Yuma that is spraying around 300 to 400 acres a night using a system of 3 drones, 2 operators, a half ton, and a trailer, right? So there is some very quantitative numbers there. Now, the other side of that is I have done a lot of research and worked with a lot of great companies on drone scouting for either agronomic data increase or pest management applications or for weed management applications and optimization. And I will say to date, this is probably the number one case where I say this technology is probably an agronomist optimization effort, but it is not a reduction in headcount, right? So now you have to go and try and explain, where is that savings coming from, the ROI? Why do I need to use this technology if I'm not reducing a headcount or if there's not real hard quantitative savings here? And that's where it really gets hard, right? You start to dig in and say, well, I think I can save the agronomist an hour here or an hour there, or I think I could save the scouting person that's going out in scouting fields, a PCA, I could save them 4 or 5 hours a day. That person's still going to go out there and do some of those activities. Are you really optimizing what they're doing? I have a hard time finding true quantitative data that suggests there is a big benefit in implementing that technology in ROI today in agriculture. I'm not saying it doesn't. I think there is a benefit there. I think our system might need to change a little bit to accommodate some of those technologies. But again, it's a really hard thing for a grower to say, I'm going to change that, change my entire system based on this technology that's really hard for me to say there are quantitative results. Sales cycles and volume expectations. Okay, you have a product that works, you got great quantitative data. Everybody thinks, in my VC pitch slide deck, I'm on the upward slope. We're going exponential. We're going to IPO and sell this baby in 2 years. Big Green's going to come buy everything I got. The best, I tell this all the time, the best case scenario for your sales pipeline, assuming you have a product that works and growers need it, a grower will say, this is great. I want 2 of these machines, and I want 2 of these machines every single year until I tell you to stop. That's probably the best you can ever hope for in agriculture adoption, right? That a grower trusts your product, a grower trusts your ROI, and a grower will trust you to provide the solution over and over and over. Remember, these are large capital intensive organizations that they have a lot of other things to do. They either have to decide if we're going to buy $500,000 pump retrofit to supply water to the crops, or if I'm going to buy an autonomous tractor. So that's why I say you have to think about the volumes, and when you're working with venture capital, trying to talk to your investors and say, oh yeah, our sales are taking off crazy. You have to understand the way we buy capital equipment in agriculture is not at this extremely high rate, right? This is a metered, calculated, trusted rate. And to be quite honest, growers have a hard time trusting single manufacturers anyways. You will see a lot of companies will be loyal to certain brands, green, red, blue, orange, a lot of different brands, but a lot of them will have a lot of different brands on their ranch, mostly because if something happens, I have a backup, and if something happens to that company, I have a way to hedge a bet. So think about your sales cycle. You're not just going to ramp up to exponential and you're just going to sell millions and millions of dollars. This is another interesting one, the last point here that I've kind of stumbled into about 6 months ago. If the ROI was there, the sales will follow no matter the cost. Now, the laser weeders are extremely expensive, $1.4, $1.5 million for the equipment, another $400,000 for the tractor. You're looking upwards of $2 million. People are buying them. There's almost 200 of them worldwide, or maybe over 200 of them. So this kind of started this thought of, well, I could sell my equipment for extremely expensive. We started to see a rush of that, and what I've started to find out is that just the number of what you sell your equipment for matters for a few different reasons. There's a sticker shock involved, but also certain people in the organization have the ability to spend a certain amount of money at will and at free. So if you think about $200,000 to $300,000, some bigger ranches, the ranch managers are able to spend that kind of money at will. That's more of a middle to upper management perspective for dirt, tillage equipment, and others can spend that kind of money. So if you're talking over that amount, over the level, 200,000, 500,000, whatever it is, it goes further up the chain or the ladder in the organization. So you get people that might not be so bullish on the technology, someone that's in senior leadership that might not see the benefit and starts to backpedal a little bit. So what we started to find out is there really is a threshold here where people can be more bullish on technology, again, knowing that they have to pay for other things in their organization and hedging bets based on what's coming in the next season and how much money they want to prioritize for technology. It really seems to be around this $250,000 to $350,000 threshold. Anything under that seems to be much easier for people to buy and adopt. Anything over that, it starts to creep into the senior leadership needs to approve, and then you have to go further down the way of validating your product has a solid ROI. Okay, now we're getting into the adoption side of things. As operational risk increases, adoption slows. This is the primary example I can talk through. This is automated irrigation. You might think, oh, automated irrigation is no brainer. You can save a ton of water, ton of time. But think about the operational risk is if water is not getting to your plants. You can lose an entire crop. In the case of permanent crops, vineyards, table grapes, permanent crops, trees, almonds, stone fruits. If you don't have irrigation, you're going to lose your crop. Think about the operational risk there. So you could have the best irrigation system on the planet. A grower is never going to say, I want you on all 20,000 acres I have. They're going to say, let's do 200 acres, or let's do 10 acres. Let's do one pump station. Okay, we'll try that out. Great, now let's do 2 pump stations. Let's do 3 pump stations. That's 3 years. Most ag tech startups don't have runway to do 1 year or 1 cycle, right? So think about what that means as far as how your runway has to be aligned with the adoption of the companies that are going to buy your product and what that means as far as an operational risk. The bigger the risk, the slower the adoption. And again, we talked about qualitative versus quantitative ROI. They seem pretty damn proportional, right? The more hard numbers you have, the easier it is to make the case. And I say this quite a bit now. You need to have quantitative data, and that is very proportional to what the adoption rate is going to be, right? So look at those 2 bullet points there. Operational risk and number of quantitative data. If you can prove those 2 things, you're working out pretty well. Business models, it's another thing. Started to learn this over the last few years. I entered into ag tech in around 2018, 2017. Started to see some really interesting business models. Some that are pretty common to agriculture as a service, input spraying and others. As a service versus direct sales. So here's a problem with if you have a as a service or direct sales. If you have as a service, you are getting revenue right away. Your customer acquisition cost is incredibly low because they can try you at a very low risk, right? But the amount of revenue you bring in as an organization is much lower than if you sell the equipment outright as an OEM, right? And I can have this as an example with FarmWise. in carbon robotics. FarmWise is running as a service at $180 an acre, and then getting up to around $220, $235, $250, $275, $300 an acre, right? So that means it's a very low entry point for the grower. Goes out and lets you try it, great. We're out on ranches, we're doing stuff. We need to scale up. Well, our technology isn't really there. It doesn't matter, we need revenue, right? We need revenue, we got to scale up. You start buying a whole bunch of machines, a whole bunch of robots. Then you realize, well, our tech isn't really as robust as we thought it was. And I will tell you also, the amount of technological debt you have still yet to discover determines what your burn rate is as a company, right? If your product is not rock solid, you have an engineering company and an agriculture services company, and the burn rate for the engineering company is not necessarily paid for by the agriculture services company. So you have to make sure your tech is very rock solid. And I believe in the agriculture as a service company, we have a lot of great examples. Wilbur Ellis, Nutrien, all kinds, Mantis Agriculture. We have a lot of great examples there. But that's because you have to make sure your technical debt is rock solid and you're not paying an engineering development team along with the revenue. Because if you're just selling the equipment, you make the revenue now, but your customer acquisition cost is much higher, right? Because it's a higher number that you're selling for, and you recoup that revenue, you get that number in today, and it's a great amount of money. You're getting it and it's working, but your customer acquisition cost is very high, right? So you have to go through all the stuff that we talked about earlier. You have to go through the ROI analysis and all that. What's better or worse? I can point to many examples in either case. And I will say that there is really a difference here between the technological debt, or the TRL, that your company is at, is directly proportional to the success you will have as running as a service. You have 15 machines, 20 machines out in the wild. At FarmWise, the case was 14 machines. Computer company stopped selling the processing computer. Now you had to retrofit 14 machines. You had an issue with the camera lens. Now you had to change camera lens. You had to do that on 14 machines. You have to have an engineering company to develop all that stuff in parallel with running an agriculture services company. Trailers, people, mechanics, sales, scouting. It adds up very, very quickly. Now, we're going to talk about the learnings in ag tech as we get to service and support. I like to call this a 1 hour rule. If you can't fix your machine in 1 hour, your trust with the grower starts diminishing incredibly fast. If you can't fix that machine in an hour, they're going to start thinking about how they can kick that thing out and bring the other thing back in. And that's, if you think about this is as I have here, the cascade of operational impact. A lot of people have a hard time realizing that in agriculture, talking about veg or permanent crops, you're doing cultivating one day, you're doing planting the next day, you're irrigating, you're doing weed treatments, you're doing beneficial applications. You're talking about 15 or 20 different applications every single day from the time that thing is planted to the time it's being harvested. And if you don't fit in that window, if your technology fails within that window, it's what we call getting kicked against the fence. You're going to park your equipment against the fence and it's going to collect dust and you're going to be a relic in the AgTech Museum. So what I try to tell startups and what I try to work with growers is hedge your bet with an AgTech startup. Don't make it so cutthroat. If they fail the first time, they're completely gone. Give them a little bit of leeway. Can you create a team within your growing company to start technology and work that progressively and do it slower? And the best case scenario is to say, look, Warren, you're running this ag tech program and you're not responsible for covering the acreage that someone else is responsible for on a daily basis, and we're going to commit to that and we're going to work through that. So that's what we're trying to do and work for the grower side. But again, I say that to all the ag technology companies today. If your machine is down for less than an hour or for more than an hour, you better start making a change very, very quickly, or else your adoption will not go as you planned. Another great learning here is seasonal preventative maintenance. We do this all the time in agriculture. Planting is a very, very good it's a very good representation of that. I actually had this happen to me. We were trying to plant the veg field out there with tomatoes about 6 weeks ago, and I called Spencer at Morningstar and I said, "Hey Spencer, I need a transplanter out here. I need to do this stuff." He said, "What are you talking about, man? Like, no one's transplanting tomatoes right now. Our transplanters are ripped apart. Guys are going through them. They're making sure they're well-oiled machines for planting season coming up here in March and April." These are other things that we do in agriculture all the time, and these are things that startups need to start thinking about this as well. Stout does a really good job at this. They say, hey, if your machine is going from Salinas to Yuma, come and drop it off at the shop. We'll put eyeballs on it for an entire day. We'll go through it at a cost, right? At an incremental cost. We'll go through it, replace all the things we need to replace. We'll make sure it's in tip-top shape, and then that way it hopefully will not break when you're using it in Yuma. So, these are things that I encourage startups to do. These are things, and even OEMs as well, major OEMs. And then these are also things I try and work with our growers to say, like, hey, look, we all need this technology. The stuff's providing a real benefit. Let's come up with a way to try and ease the pain point here. But at the end of the day, growers are investing in this technology. It needs to fit into their system. They can't make a huge operational change in order to accommodate this into their system. So we're trying on both ends. But these are some of the learnings from both of those. We're talking ROI and the adoption side of it. As I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, we are releasing our new case study today. This was done with Cal.net. Cal.net is a real rural internet service provider. They also created an IoT system for automated irrigation, and they actually created this automated irrigation system. Don Cameron, who's another progressive grower, is also on the board of Western Growers, wanted to have an automation irrigation system. Don knows that we have what we call SGMA, Sustainable Groundwater Initiative, that is going to impact our growers, how and what and how much they can use water. So Don said, I got to get ahead of this. We got to do automation irrigation. But there was a problem. Don just couldn't do an automated irrigation. You can't even pick up the cell phone on his ranch. It's out in the middle of nowhere. So he had to invest in infrastructure to enable that technology, which is something we're working with our growers today as well. Whether that's autonomous tractors, whether that's laser weeders, whether that's, incredibly advanced irrigation systems, you have to have available infrastructure in order to access this technology. So a part of this is saying we have to buy the internet to be able to access it. That's what Don did. He spent capital outlay for this. He had a custom system design. They did 400 acres of processing tomatoes. He saved 34% of water in the first year of using this, which might not seem like a big deal. It's not a huge amount of cost, but for growers who might not be able to have water for growing that crop, it's a big deal. So growers are now deciding, can I grow a processing tomatoes and can I grow a winter over onions crop? And that's how I can survive as a business. Well, man, if I can't use that much water, maybe I just grow the one crop. Maybe I grow the tomatoes. Maybe I grow the onions instead. So this is something that, again, our progressive growers are really leaning into tech. Don is no exception. He's a leader in that space. So this is our case study on automated irrigation. It's not as big and sexy as a laser weeder or some of the others, but it's providing a real benefit and value to growers. So we're happy to release this case study. It's live on our website. Again, if you go to Western Growers Innovation Case Studies, you'll see these. We have 3 of them now, Carbon, Stout, and Cal.net. And we will have more in the pipeline, Gus, eco-robotics, drones for application spraying. So that is, I believe, all the slides. Yeah. This is a QR code for that case study. You can take a picture of that. It'll take you right to it. That is my information. I'm always happy to stay in touch with people. That is my job, to work with technologists and growers. And feel free to reach out to me and my boss, Walter, on LinkedIn extensively. So happy to be in contact.
Thank you, Ben. Let's give Ben a hand. Does anybody have a question? We have maybe time for 1 or 2 questions. Anybody have a question for Ben? Speak now or forever hold your peace. You have a question, okay.
The question
I'm
was,
sorry,
is there an, that's okay.
I was just wondering if there's a news release about this. I've looked at the case study.
No, we are going to do internal marketing at Western Growers. If you want the exclusive, you can have it, Warren. Oh.
Right behind you.
Yeah.
Ben, this is Gus here from Nutrien. The previous grower panel, the grower talked about how frustrating it is to try and get data from different systems into something where he can make a decision. Obviously, that landscape showing the crop robotics, like just the amount of companies that are coming out with new technologies, and each one is trying to come to the market with what they think is their product market fit, and then you guys have to try and struggle with that to do a case study. Do you have any ideas on how you can sort of build systems in so that you don't have to do the heavy lifting each time to try and communicate to the grower what the actual value is, and that you can sort of automate it in a way that the grower can just plug that data into the systems that they need to use? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. You're saying, is there a way to automate kind of what the results of the AGTECH are, and then so that way it's something that a grower can see instantaneously? Is that right? Yeah, okay. So usually AgTech companies provide a certain service. They provide a certain thing. Killing weeds, spraying things, harvesting things. That is their core function, their value proposition of what they offer. Outside of that, if they offer data, it's usually in a messy way. There's really not a streamlined way for growers to take that. Now, there have been some companies that have tried to make custom dashboards and do some things. They do, like Carbon does really well with the dashboard and how many weeds you killed and some of those things. So some of these companies do that as a method of, putting the growers at ease that they are, the money is doing okay and that the money is well spent. I will say there are some other companies that are creating a ecosystem or space for open APIs to flood into, and then they can create more general dashboards as well. So kind of at the sticky point, growers say, we have all the data, we just don't know what to do with it. And some of the AgTech companies are like, well, that's not my core value proposition, so I'm not really sure it's worth a value to me to project that to the grower unless I have to. So it's kind of in a funky spot. I know that answers your question, but we're not really there yet. Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Ben. Thanks for everybody
Yeah.
for attending.